I've often wondered if there's actually a consensus on the greatest retro games of all time. You ask 10 gamers and you get 10 different answers. Some will swear by Chrono Trigger. Someone else will argue it's Metroid. Another person's gonna bring up Doom and look at you like you're insane if you disagree. So I've spent months thinking about this, playing through these classics again and arguing with myself in the middle of the night, making tons of reviews about many of them you might also want to check out. And when it came time to rank the top 25 retro games of all time, I couldn't just line them up by release date. That would be too easy, and honestly, it wouldn't tell you anything about what actually makes these games great. So instead, I started with 4 simple questions. Did the game invent something new, or perfect something that was already existing in a way that changed the future of gaming? Next was, how much magic were the developers able to squeeze out of the hardware? The graphics, the controls, the sound. And does the game still feel good to play today, or is it just a museum piece that we respect from a distance? And finally, did it break out of the screen and become something bigger to become part of gaming culture forever? These 4 filters gave some surprising results, which is exactly what I wanted. So be sure to watch until the end, because this is a conversation about what truly matters. Now, let's jump right into it. At number 25 is GoldenEye 007. This 1997 N64 shooter came on a whopping 96 megabit cartridge. The single-player campaign redefined console shooters with objective-based missions, stealth mechanics, and intense firefights set in the iconic movie locations like the Facility and the Dam. While it's famous for its legendary 4-player split-screen multiplayer, the solo experience is still the true core of the game. But here's the thing. The frame rate kind of chugs. The solo controls haven't aged too well, and the enemy AI feels stiff compared to what came later. Still, the feeling of that rumble pack shaking each time you shoot made the memories golden, but James Bond's solo outing has started to show its age, which is why it ranks here in the list. Number 24 is Final Fantasy III. This 1994 SNES RPG was originally released in Japan as Final Fantasy VI, but in North America as Final Fantasy III. And its 16-bit graphics were gorgeous. The story of Terra, Locke, and Celes dealing with Kefka's madness was emotionally devastating. Kefka remains one of the greatest villains in gaming history, and he actually wins. He destroys the world, and you have to pick up the pieces in the second half. The massive cast of characters, each with their own story arcs. The Esper system for learning magic. The way the game completely shifts its tone after the Cataclysm. It was ambitious in a way that few RPGs had ever attempted. But in my mind, the second half loses some of the narrative focus, and the random encounter rate just feels exhausting, and some characters are underdeveloped compared to the stars. Sure, it's still a masterpiece, but it's not quite as tight as some of the other games that beat it on this list. At number 23 is Dragon Force. This 1996 Saturn gem could put 200 soldiers on the screen simultaneously without slowdown. Watching those massive battles are super impressive visually. The grand-scale combat was thrilling, and the plot was surprisingly intricate, but it's a niche title on kind of a niche console, and the battle system can feel chaotic and sometimes be a bit hard to follow. It's brilliant, but it never reached the audience it actually deserved. Number 22 is Mortal Kombat. This 1992 arcade game ran on Midway's Y-Unit hardware. The digitized graphics looked almost photorealistic to my teenager eyes. The blood, the fatalities, the sheer thrill, it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. But let's be honest about something. The gameplay itself is kinda stiff, and once you get past the shock value, there's not that much depth. It's historically important, yeah, and I'll never forget the first time I saw a fatality, but it doesn't hold up mechanically, which is why it doesn't rank any higher on the list. Number 21 is Panzer Dragoon. This 1995 Saturn rail shooter had you riding a dragon through 7 levels of post-apocalyptic beauty. The atmosphere was haunting, the soundtrack was so memorable, and the lock-on targeting added a new gameplay twist. The first time I popped this disc into my Saturn, I was blown away. But the problem is that rail shooters are a limited genre. You're on rails, and while that's a beautiful ride, once you've seen it, you've seen it. Still, it's a beautiful work of art in its own right that gives a sugar rush high while it lasts, which makes it worthy of its place on our list. And number 20 is Daytona USA's 8-cabinet networked setup, which transformed arcade racing into a spectacle unmatched to this day. Released back in 1994, Sega's masterpiece utilized the cutting-edge Model 2 hardware to deliver buttery smooth 60 frames per second 3D graphics and a drift-heavy physics engine that was easy to learn but pretty difficult to master. Look, and if you've played this, you'll never forget how when 8 of those deluxe cabinets were linked together, the game shifted from a standard race against CPU drivers into a white-knuckle arena of human competition, with its booming soundtrack that commanded attention across the entire arcade floor. The multiplayer configuration perfected the concept of arcade community, created an elbow-to-elbow competitive environment that modern online matchmaking simply can't replicate. But since there are only 3 unique tracks in the arcade version, it keeps this one from ranking higher on the list, but it's still great fun. Our number 19 is Halo Combat Evolved, November 2001, the original Xbox. Is that retro now? I don't know. Kinda feels like it to me 25 years later. This game was a breakthrough on console first-person shooters. The 2-weapon limit, the regenerating shields, the Warthog's handling, it all felt just right. I was really into PC gaming when this came out, so I was pretty skeptical, but then I finally got my own Xbox and something clicked. The campaign was solid, the multiplayer was revolutionary, but compared to other PC shooters of the era, it also felt a bit slow and simplified. Still, it changed the console landscape, but it didn't reinvent the wheel. Number 18 is Tomb Raider. Back in '96, Core Design changed the whole gaming landscape by dropping us into these massive, fully 3D ancient ruins packed with traps. Running around as the legendary Lara Croft, leaping across chasms and solving crazy puzzles felt like a total rush of pure discovery. The game's lonely, eerie vibe gets even better thanks to that minimalist soundtrack. Say what you want about those janky early 3D camera controls, but anyone who's actually played it back then knows that Tomb Raider was a top-notch action-adventure game that modern games have been copying now for decades. This one really changed what we expect, and for that reason, it deserves its spot as one of the greatest retro games of all time. Number 17 is the original Sonic the Hedgehog. This 1991 Genesis game introduced a level of pure speed that was exhilarating. And where Mario's platforming was about precision, Sonic was the opposite: momentum, loops, and launching off ramps. The vibrant colors, the catchy music, the attitude. Sonic felt like the cool older brother that Mario never had, and it spawned an incredible franchise of games and even some hit movies. But in all fairness, it's also a bit shallow. Once you master the speed, there's not much else to discover. I mean, the rush is brilliant, but the rush fades. Before we dive into it further, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is always here for a quick retro gaming break whenever you need it. I appreciate your support since it's the only way that YouTube will highlight my videos and help my channel to grow. Number 16 is Castlevania. This 1986 platformer was developed by Konami. With its gothic horror atmosphere, tight controls, and challenging difficulty, it was different than any platformer I'd played before. The whip felt really satisfying, your sub-weapons added some depth, and the boss battles were seriously intimidating. I mean, I died over and over to the Medusa heads, but I kept coming back. It's a classic, but the reason it's not higher up in our list is because it's just too linear and punishing in ways that can feel unfair. Our number 15 is Final Fantasy VII. This 1997 PlayStation game came on 3 CDs. Its 3D graphics, the pre-rendered backgrounds, the epic story. It was unlike any other RPG we'd ever played before. I remember spending over 100 hours exploring Midgar, breeding chocobos, and hunting for the super boss, Ruby Weapon. And one of the characters' death actually hit me harder than any movie I'd ever seen. It brought RPGs into the mainstream, and yeah, it's a bit messy in places and the translation's kind of weird, but the emotional feeling of playing it remains unmatched. It ranks here because it's ambitious and unforgettable, but later entries in the series, and actually even some of the earlier Final Fantasy games, have tighter mechanics. Number 14 is Super Mario 64. Released back in June 1996 in Japan as a day one title for the Nintendo 64, this was the game that made 3D platforming work. The sensitivity of the analog stick, the camera system, and how fluidly Mario moved, it was pretty unbelievable that this was actually real back at the time. I mean, when I first played it, I was so transfixed. Jumping into paintings, sliding down castle walls, flying with the wing cap, it was pure magic. Okay, I admit, the camera is infuriating at times, and some of the stars just feel like filler, but the core experience is undeniably great. At number 13 is Phantasy Star 4, The End of the Millennium. Released in 1993, this Genesis title revolutionized storytelling in JRPGs by replacing the standard text blocks with dynamic, manga-style panels that brought its sci-fi and fantasy to life, and the gameplay was equally groundbreaking. Introducing advanced features for its time like customizable battle macros and combination attacks that allowed characters to merge their magic into devastating team attacks. Set across a sprawling world, unforgettable characters like Chaz and Alice, and its great soundtrack, it truly delivered an epic and satisfying conclusion to the Algo Solar System saga. By blending incredible graphics and art design with deep, turn-based combat, Phantasy Star 4 stands as a timeless gem in the crown of the Sega Genesis. Number 12 is The Legend of Zelda. Released first in 1986 on the Famicom Disk System, this later came out on a 128 KB cartridge for the NES. I remember drawing maps on graph paper, marking every secret cave and hidden heart container. The game didn't tell you where to go, you had to figure it out yourself. That sense of discovery is something modern games struggle to replicate sometimes. It's the original action-adventure. While the battery save was a luxury at the time, and the vision was pure, the combat is a bit too simple, which is why there's still 11 other games that rank above it. Speaking of number 11, we have Tetris. This puzzle game became an international sensation, particularly on the Game Boy. The Game Boy's cartridge weighed in at a tiny 32 KB, and the gameplay was deceptively simple. Rotate the falling blocks to complete lines, but the challenge was addictive. I played this on road trips, hunched over my Game Boy with the worm light attachment, trying to beat my older brother's high score. It's the ultimate pick-up-and-play game. It lacks any narrative and characters, which is the whole point. It's perfect in its simplicity, and it still holds up brilliantly. Now, real quick, before we dive into the top 10, if you enjoy this content, I've put a link in the description below of a playlist of all my other videos that you might also enjoy. So check it out and stick around for a while. Okay, number 10 is Phantasy Star. Released in 1987 for the Sega Master System, also known as the Sega Mark III in Japan, this RPG came on a 4 megabit cartridge. It was Sega's answer to Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, and in many ways, it was far ahead of the competition. The first-person dungeon crawling, the science fantasy setting that blended magic and technology, its female protagonist, Alice. This was all revolutionary stuff almost 40 years ago. And even on an 8-bit system, the graphics were really stunning on the Master System, with its huge detailed enemy sprites that even today look more like something you'd see in later 16-bit RPGs. Its story was darker and more mature than many other games at the time, dealing with themes of oppression and rebellion. But even so, it's held back by some brutal difficulty spikes, tough progression that requires a lot of trial and error, and dungeons that are nearly impossible to navigate in the endgame levels. It certainly deserves a spot here for its technical ambition and influence, especially on later RPGs, but it's not as polished as the classics above it. At number 9 is Super Metroid. In this 1994 SNES classic, Nintendo's R&D 1 team created a flawless fusion of atmosphere and exploration. The way the game opened up as you acquired new abilities created an incredible sense of progression. The game trusted you to figure things out and didn't bother holding your hand. It perfected the Metroidvania concept so completely that developers are still copying it today. So it's earned its place in the top 10, since it took everything that made the original Metroid great and polished it to near perfection. This game just did everything right. Our number 8 is Pac-Man. Released by Namco in 1980 at the arcade, this game ran on a Z80 CPU with just 16 KB of program ROM. The maze chase gameplay, the power pellets, the ghost AI that made each chase feel unique. It was simply genius. I remember the Pac-Man fever craze, all of the merchandise, and even the cartoon. This experience transcended gaming and became part of pop culture forever. It's arguably the most famous video game character on the planet, and sure, it's a maze game at its core, but what a game! It proved that video games are for everyone. Yet, despite how addictive it is, compared to the games above it, the gameplay loop is a lot simpler and the depth isn't quite there. Number 7 is The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. This 1998 N64 game was loaded onto a giant 256 megabit cartridge, and its Z-targeting system alone changed how we think about 3D combat. The ocarina mechanics even turned music into a gameplay element. Its time travel created a sense of consequence and discovery that few games have matched. Remember stepping out into Hyrule Field the first time? It felt impossibly vast. The water temple is still a nightmare, but that's part of the experience. And making the leap from top-down 2D to an immersive 3D experience redefined what adventure games could be. It sits here because it took an existing formula and elevated it to something transcendent and an absolute joy to play today. Alright, number 6 is Street Fighter II. This arcade game ran on Capcom's CP system hardware. The 6-button layout, the special moves, and the 2-player mode. It created the standard for every fighting game that followed. I spent countless quarters perfecting Ryu's Hadouken. The sound of that announcer yelling KO is permanently burned into my brain. It genuinely perfected the fighting game formula so thoroughly that its influence is still felt in almost all modern fighting games. It earns this high spot for how it remained a trailblazer in the genre for decades. At number 5 is Resident Evil. This 1996 PlayStation game basically invented survival horror. The fixed camera angles, its tank controls, and the limited ammunition. Everything was designed to make you feel vulnerable. I remember playing this in the dark with my cousin and passing over the controller when things got too intense. Now, the voice acting was famously terrible, but that also made it more endearing. It created a new type of game that's still thriving, and its emphasis on resource management and atmospheric tension set the standard that few games could match at the time. Yeah, it's clunky by today's standards, but its DNA is in every horror game that you've played since. Number 4 is Doom. Released in 1993 by id Software, this required a 486 processor and 4 megabytes of RAM. The engine was revolutionary at the time, creating a convincing 3D space on hardware that had no business running 3D games. I remember the first time installing it from a stack of shareware floppy disks and was absolutely terrified, but loved every second of the carnage. The demons, the dark corridors, the shocking sound effects, it was unlike anything I'd experienced. And firing up Deathmatch over a serial cable was peak gaming back in the early 90s. It didn't only popularize the first-person shooter genre, it forever changed the trajectory of PC gaming. I mean, without Doom, there's no Half-Life, no Call of Duty, no modern FPS. It sits at number 4 because its impact is monumental, but the games above it have an even broader reach in their own rights. Number 3 is Virtua Fighter 2. Yeah, this might come as a surprise to you, but to me, it makes perfect sense. Let me explain. Released in arcades in 1994, this ran on Sega's Model 2 hardware at a buttery 60 frames per second. The fluid animation, the ring-out mechanic, the distinct fighting styles and new characters, it set the standard for every 3D fighter that followed. I remember seeing this and thinking to myself that we'd reached the peak of what graphics could look like. But beyond the technical brilliance, what makes it rank so high is that it was a true breakthrough for 3D fighting. It had the sophistication and depth, the responsiveness, and that competitive balance that made 3D fighters even more nuanced than the old-style 2D games. And yeah, it might feel a little bit cold and clinical compared to the bright comic book personality of 2D fighters like Street Fighter 2, its technical achievement and lasting influence on the genre are undeniable. And number 2 is Chrono Trigger. This 1995 SNES JRPG was made by the dream team of Hironobu Sakaguchi, Yuji Horii, and Akira Toriyama, who created something truly special. The time-traveling narrative, the active time battle system, and all of the multiple endings. I mean, I've played through this at least 4 times now, and the first time I discovered that you could fight Lavos near the start blew my mind. Look, it redefined the RPG formula to a degree that few games have ever matched, and did away with the random encounter so common in most RPGs. Its story is complex and layered, and it develops the characters in a way that you genuinely care about. So to me, it's the absolute pinnacle of the 16-bit RPG era, which earns the number 2 spot because of its incredible execution. But I've gotta say, the only reason it's not number 1 is since it's a refinement of an existing formula rather than a complete innovation from the ground up. So, number 1 has to be Super Mario Bros. Released by Nintendo in 1985 for the NES, this game is coming off the 1983 video game crash when the industry was effectively dead in North America. So the NES and this one cartridge helped revive the entire market. And if you were around back then, you know it pretty much invented the side-scroller genre as we all know it today, with its crisp controls, tons of hidden secrets, power-ups, and that unforgettable soundtrack. I saw it at a department store display with another kid playing it and just stood there watching, completely mesmerized. The way that Mario moved, the way the world scrolled by, and the music changed when you got a power-up, it was so amazing. I saved my allowance for months to get an NES for this, and even playing it again today, to me, it's worth every penny. So, there you have it, the definitive list of the best 25 retro games of all time. If somehow you never played one of these, do yourself a favor and find a way to experience it now. Track down the old arcade cabinets if you can. Fire up an emulator, dig out your old console out of the attic, or get a modern digital re-release. And while the graphics on some might look dated, and the controls might be a bit clunky, and the difficulty may be brutal, if you play them with an open mind, you'll understand why we still talk about them all these years later, and why they still matter. Now, I want to hear from you about which games I've missed. How would you rank them differently? Let me know in the comments below, and I really do read every single one. Alright my friends, this is the Retro Gaming Boss signing out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.